with Docs. I am Dr. Erica and I am a GP in Linda, who is an A&E doctor up in Sheffield, and we're both lifestyle medicine doctors.
It is so lovely to see so many recurring faces and also new ones too. Hello, Susan. Hello, Laura. Hello, Sue. If you're new to us, we love to get to know you. Please share where you are joining in from. What is your favorite cold or hot cup of tea? Or maybe you don't like tea at all. That's fine too. Here in the chat, you can interact with us. And if you are watching us on YouTube, please leave us a comment. Well, we dedicate each month to a specific disease so that we can give it a good coverage and share the best up-to-date scientific knowledge in that topic. And July is Cancer Month. And we are discussing lifestyle changes that can help to prevent, treat, and reverse different types of cancers. And on the last Sunday, like today, we all share a patient success story where the patient, him or herself, actually used lifestyle principles to assist with their healing, prevention, treatment, and reversal of diseases. We host afternoon tea with docs every Sunday at 5 p.m. UK time, where you can connect with world-renowned lifestyle medicine experts and patients like our guest today, Dr. Susan Kennelly, who is actually both a doctor and a patient who has used lifestyle principles. Each afternoon tea event is divided into two parts. The first one that is running right now, where we are actually live streaming it to YouTube, Facebook, and on Instagram, so everybody can have access to this life-saving information. And the second part is where you can actually speak to our guests in person, privately, without the recording, in a safe environment. So looking forward to that second bit always, where we can get a little bit more intimate and deeper into the conversation. If you're ready to implement lifestyle changes, then you can also join our lifestyle medicine membership area, which is completely free of charge. So you can implement lifestyle changes and nutritional changes with us on the shop floor. We're going to add the links to where you can follow us on our website and on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, just here on the chat. And also you can see it in the comments in YouTube or on Facebook.
Today we've got Dr. Susan Kennelly, who is a GP general practitioner in Corrib Medical Centre in Galway City on the west coast of Ireland. She has always been acutely aware of the benefits of exercise and trained as a Pilates instructor during her undergraduate medical degree. She researched the benefits of Pilates for managing mechanical back pain while completing her specialist training in general practice, and was awarded a diploma in musculoskeletal examination and injury management from the Royal College of Surgeons, Faculty of Sports Medicine, and Irish College of General Practitioners in 2010. She rode for National University of Ireland Galway from 2015 to 2018, winning national championships in both indoor and outdoor rowing, and participated in events in Henley, Eton, Dorney, Amsterdam, and the World Masters Championships in Lake Bled, Slovenia. She is also an advocate for Cycling Ireland's Bike Like Me initiative, which encourages women to participate in sport. Susan's continual involvement in sport has strongly influenced her clinical practice and cultivated an interest in lifestyle medicine, which she practices daily. She has attended the clinical education prescribing lifestyle medicine course and holds a certificate in plant-based nutrition from the University of Winchester. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in April 2020, and while this was an enormous shock to her, she found that continuing to apply the principles of lifestyle medicine had a hugely positive impact on her journey through treatment and recovery. Hello, Susan, welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us for afternoon tea, and we can't wait to find out more about your journey and how you use lifestyle to implement it.
How are you today, Susan?
Good. Thanks a million for having me.
You're on the other side today.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we go into your journey, do you mind sharing with us a little bit about you? Just, I mean, we've heard all your wonderful achievements already, but maybe more on a personal note, and what kind of made you want to be a doctor in the first place?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I thought you might ask me actually, and I don't know, like a lot of guests, I don't think I had a really strong thinking, oh, I must do medicine from an early age. I was always really interested in science, and I remember going to my GP at home when I was, I think, maybe doing my leaving cert, so kind of my A levels. And he was asking me what I was thinking of doing. And I said, oh, I wouldn't mind doing something, in research and cancer research. And he said, you'd be wasted in a lab. Like, why don't you're much more of a people person. So why don't you do medicine? And you can always see from there. And that kind of made me think. I was also really artistic. So I was debating. So I kind of tossed a coin between doing art or medicine, and felt that if I was doing art for a living, it mightn't be very much fun. So the aim was to kind of do it in my part-time, and I kind of, that's one of my paintings behind me. So at least I kind of continue to do some of my hobbies in my part-time. But I think when I graduated, I wasn't hugely enthusiastic about medicine in college. I kind of felt the science of it. It was a bit dull maybe in some ways. And then as soon as I graduated, I absolutely adored it, and suddenly realized this is, I think, the interaction with patients, as opposed to kind of recounting facts and just listing things out. And I think that's what really cemented it for me and made me decide to be a GP. I think really was when I kind of saw in hospital medicine the lack of continuity you had with your patients. And I really loved how you could be kind of part of a community as a GP, and you were, in many ways, you have a more of an informal relationship maybe, because your patients kind of come in, you have a one-to-one relationship. In your surgery, it's outside of kind of, like, I know you're an ER doctor, Linda, so in the A&E side of it, when you have your beeping machines and your trolleys and your nursing staff and your porters, and there's so many people there, whereas in a general practice surgery, it's often just you and the patient, one-to-one, and I just really valued that relationship.
Wow. Art, between art and medicine.
Yeah, quite a contrast. And that's why I ended up in Galway, because Galway is certainly a more bohemian type city. And I felt I could probably do both there, whereas maybe one of the other cities, maybe not so much.
Right. I'd love to have a closer look at that painting, but from where I'm sitting, it looks amazing.
It's the sea. It's a diving board in Blackrock, which is a place where I swim every day. So it's kind of an experimental one that kind of, well, it fits that wall. There's a few more around.
It looks almost like a picture, a photograph. It almost looks like a photograph from you.
You're being very kind.
Not at all. You were talking about, I forgot my train of thought talking about.
It is a beautiful painting. You lose control when you see it. But I wanted to ask, is it oil painting or it's just hard to see? Yeah,
it's an oil painting. So it's a kind of, it was just, the thinking was to do a triptych. So it's not really supposed to be like, usually if you do a triptych, it's either series of things. So it was based on a stormy day, and then I kind of thought it would be kind of fun to just break it up and still have the continuity. So that's why you can see the two kind of bars coming down. So it's three parts that are together, and it's just the waves crashing over the diving board.
Wow, it's beautiful. And you're not the first doctor who almost went down the artistic path on our show. I see Shireen in the audience, and when she was on, she was talking about perhaps wanting to do music. So wow. Now I remember what I was going to ask you. It was about you saying that being a GP can be a part of a community, and indeed you work in the city centre, don't you? And your patients often see you out and about, cycling, swimming in the sea, and how do you feel that sort of relationship impacts on that sort of interaction with your patients, impact on the doctor-patient relationship for you?
Yeah, I think, like, I do feel a lot of the time we probably do need to lead by example, and I think seeing I don't think it's good enough for us to be spouting about what you need to do for your own health and then not following it ourselves. And I do think, certainly for me, I thought it was quite helpful in a way that, like, a lot of patients throughout my treatment said, I saw you out the prom, I saw you out swimming, I saw you cycling, you look great. And it sort of shows that you don't have these kind of preconceived barriers that we have in our minds. You can kind of dispel some of those myths. And I think there's this prevailing thought that if you have cancer, you're really delicate, you know, if you've had chemo, because you look sick. And like, that's probably certainly one of the hardest things I think any cancer patient going through chemotherapy will say, is losing your hair, because it's just such a public sign to everybody that you're going through something. But I think we still feel we shouldn't do anything. You should merely rest and lie down and just retreat. And I think by patients seeing you not doing that, it kind of reinforces that there is an alternative way. So I think you do need to lead by example. It's the same by meeting patients when I'm up at the veggie stalls at the farmers market on Saturday and things like that, that you're practicing what you preach, I suppose.
Absolutely, leading by example. It's hard for us to be of any credibility if we're sitting there with, a bottle of Coke and crisps for lunch, and then telling our patients to eat healthily. That just doesn't match up, does it? So yeah. So you talked about your cancer treatment. Do you mind kind of, you were diagnosed in the middle of a pandemic, and I believe you had to go to your appointments alone, and having to receive that news alone in clinic. How was it? How was your experience being diagnosed and investigated during the pandemic?
Yeah, it was tricky in that I found I was working as a GP and it was really busy. I was very stressed. I thought we were going to be another Italy. We've got, our practice is quite young, but we've got quite a few elderly patients that have done, have really good lives and are really, really healthy 70-year-olds. And I just felt, is this virus just going to come along and take all these people? And I kind of felt it was like kind of standing on the shore, and you knew you could see something on the horizon. Was it a wave or was it going to be a tsunami? And you were kind of preparing that it could be a tsunami and absolutely devastate, but you were powerless to do anything about it. And I think those few weeks, certainly from March to April, we were working, we were very, very busy, and I kind of had all this nervous energy. And usually my way of doing that is I exercise a lot. So I was still swimming and running and doing lots of stuff and working a lot, and I lost weight and found a lump. And in my own head, I was like, there's no family history. You're so healthy. This must be a cyst. But really felt there was so much else going on that just act on it. You can't be worrying about this as well. You can't have the distraction of, oh God, could this be something else? So I just got it checked out and went into I contacted the symptomatic breast unit in our local hospital, and they saw me within a week, less than a week. But like, I went in that morning kind of thinking I'll be back to work this afternoon, and I really didn't expect. So the consultant there, like, he was wonderful, and he pretty much called it, because I'd suddenly gone from being like a healthcare professional and a frontline worker to suddenly being one of the high-risk patients. Especially back in March, April, anybody with cancer was suddenly category 5. They were high risk and needed to cocoon. And that was pretty abrupt. And I suppose, yeah, like, I'd gone in on my own. So then my partner was able to come in with me when we got results. But I'd have more tests and different tests. And initially I had surgery and all of those. You'd usually have somebody there for support, but because of COVID, you weren't going to have anybody. It was purely you on your own. Which I think probably by being a healthcare professional in ways, maybe it wasn't as scary for me, or maybe I was just going through the process. But I did feel probably by talking about it to my family, to some of my friends and those that aren't medical, I think you probably sugarcoated a little bit more. And I was the one relaying the story. There would have been other times, it would have been the oncologist would have been in telling, say, my partner, and my partner might have been telling my family, whereas instead it was kind of all coming via me. So I think you do tend to protect them a little bit, and maybe you're not quite as honest about it all. But I know I rang my mum, and she originally thought, she just kind of knew from the voice, you know, that there was something up. And I think she thought I had COVID. And in one way, I think she was nearly reassured, not, well, slightly relieved when she heard it was cancer, breast cancer. And I can actually, like somebody laughed at that, but I can actually understand that, because we've a lot of advances. We know a lot of what to do. Like, it is a devastating diagnosis, and it pretty much just stops your life. But at that time, we were seeing really, really sick people going into ICU and not coming back out. Really, really young, otherwise healthy people. And we were dealing with this virus we knew very little about. Whereas at least you had a kind of a fairly clear treatment plan as to what was going to go ahead with breast cancer. So yeah,
I guess COVID was so unknown at that time. It was still really early, whereas at least with breast cancer, you knew what was going to happen. You knew you were going to have surgery, chemo, and things. So it was kind of like an enemy that you kind of knew a lot more about.
Like, it obviously wasn't good news, but it was a known entity, as opposed to this kind of unknown entity that COVID had brought up, and long COVID, and you know, there's still so much unknown about it, really. Whereas with pretty good treatment protocols and plans, and once I knew my diagnosis and my histology, you know, then you know what you're dealing with. So that first week was really tough, because you're waiting to know and worrying, could it be triple negative, and worrying about the worst cancers that we've heard of in many ways. And you know, there's nothing you can do to change what that histology is going to be. You're just sitting waiting and powerless. And that's where I think that time, it's very tricky, because you're you feel very betrayed by your body, and you feel like, I would have always been, you kind of read out a bit about my background, like I've always been really active and always really into looking after my health. And a lot of people ask me, like, are you bitter? Are you like really annoyed that other people who don't mind themselves didn't get this? And I think it goes back to what Robert Thomas was saying a few weeks ago, is the kind of, you shouldn't sort of say, why me, but why not me? And look at it, and you certainly wouldn't wish it on anybody else. But you also know that this is something that certainly, okay, it may not have been lifestyle related, probably isn't lifestyle related, but you look at the other side of the way that you lived well and were healthy going in, made you feel, well, I'll be able to get through this, and will be a good candidate for the treatment that I have, because I'm not bringing other chronic diseases and other chronic lifestyle associated conditions in with me.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're very you had a very positive attitude going in with your diagnosis and your treatment. I mean, psychologically, how did it impact you when you went in thinking, I'm going to come back out and go back to work this afternoon, and then you received this sort of news that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, like you're stunned, you know, and it really does feel like your world just stops. And I think, you know, it no more so than something else with very bad news, but it's kind of, it goes around in your head, and for a moment because again, you don't feel sick. I didn't feel ill, you know, I wasn't. So in ways you're like, oh, maybe, is it really happening? Is it really this? And because I felt well, I think I still continue to kind of try to do stuff, try to keep active, try to continue doing what I'd always done, just so that at least that might help you sleep a bit better in that week that you're waiting to get your results. You know, if you've had your fresh air and you're not having too much coffee and you're eating well. So I think you go very much back to basics. And I think I was very lucky in that was something that was already very familiar to me. So it didn't feel like this rapid change that I'd have to suddenly overhaul my entire life to try and get through this. But I mean, it is a very, I suppose, speaking from personally, yeah, it's like it's not the kind of thing I was remotely on my radar. And like yes, my aunt had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but other than that, there's no family history of breast cancer. There's no real, like my grandmother she passed away earlier this year, but she was 100, and her mother lived to 104. So like there's longevity there, and there's healthy people. So that it certainly was very startling. And I spoke to a friend of mine who was an oncologist, and he was very much kind of saying, I just asked him a little bit about, just again, I wanted to kind of find out about seeing, could I get involved? Were there any trials if I was to offer my experiences or see from the point of view of exercise during chemo? And he was very much saying, look, there was nothing you could have done. This was preordained, this is predestined. But the fact that you are so fit, that you are so healthy, and you are so positive is only going to be a plus. And that just kind of, I think, made the treatment you just get through it then. And suddenly you've one chemo session down, and then you've 2 chemo sessions down, and then you're halfway through, and suddenly the end is in sight, and you've kind of gone through all that part. And I'm lucky. I think my family are very, very positive. I was brought up in that way. I've always been a glass is always half full, and I think it just helped to look at things that way.
I guess this just illustrates that there is no right or wrong way to feel when you get a diagnosis like this. As you said, people asked you if you felt bitter. Yes, some people might feel bitter. With you, it sounded like you were quite positive and stoic with the way that you approached it. And some people might be in denial. There's all sorts of different emotions, and having that support from your loving family, it's also really important throughout your journey. You talked about the being fit at baseline, and how people, your oncologist or your friend said to you that actually that gives you a really good baseline to then go on and have your treatment. When we were talking earlier, you were talking about rehabilitation as well, which is something that research that you're now involved in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, even if you were genetically predisposed to have cancer, if your baseline health is good, and you don't have the other comorbidities that might then affect your ability to receive the treatment, it does make a massive difference to how your body can cope with the treatment, side effects and things like that.
Yeah.
And you were saying that you basically, because of your baseline fitness, you were able to exercise throughout your treatment almost every single day, other than a couple of days post-surgery.
Yeah, I think, like, I feel, I actually probably, when I was diagnosed first, I would have exercised a huge amount, because it was always a stress. The weather was really good here. We were in the middle of a 2K lockdown. The only way you could meet anybody was going for a walk or going out doing some sort of training. And I'd, again, cultivated friendships that they were friends of mine that, yeah, we would go and maybe go to a soccer pitch and do like some sort of a HIIT training and something with burpees and something with something else. And I remember one of my friends, her sons were doing, there was it was a challenge for April, which was the Bernardo's, it's a children's charity. I don't know if it's in the UK. Kind of 1,000 burpees for the month of April. So her sons were planning on doing it, and she was just commented, this is my work colleague. So she was saying her sons were trying to do it during lockdown, but there were days there were a few burpees done, a few days that others weren't. And I kind of went, I think I could probably do that. So, but I only had kind of 2.5 weeks to do it, because then I had surgery and definitely couldn't be doing full length burpees. So I just, I think I found you needed to feel to do something. And for me, I think it was a really good way of just using up some of that nervous energy and quietening that mind. Like you're right, you said I think I was quite positive, and that just came naturally to me. And I don't think there is any right or wrong way to react. But I think there are certain emotions that will be counterproductive, and that won't help you through the treatments, I think. And then there's others, at least I feel that's where the prehabilitation comes in that if you can do something even before, like, so I went in for my first surgery, and I remember the surgeon said, like, what do you do? Because he just said, you're just so lean and fit and your heart rate is so low. And, you know, he wasn't used to seeing that. And it meant, he said the surgery was so uncomplicated because he could see all the muscles, like it was like a textbook, an anatomy textbook. But it meant that, yeah, like the following day, especially after the first surgery, the following day I was out walking again, you know, and then you're not into the risks of getting, you know, post-op DVTs, I think your healing is way better. So, and then psychologically as well, because you start feeling stronger. So your body has betrayed you in some ways because you didn't anticipate a diagnosis of cancer, but you're doing something for yourself that's giving you a physical reward. And I think that's really powerful. And I think that's something that we really need to tap into from a prehabilitation. Most people get diagnosed with cancer and there's a couple of weeks waiting for biopsy results, treatment plans, and you're completely helpless. You're at the whim. There's, like I said, there's nothing you can do to know what type of cancer, how aggressive or not it may be. And if you can give people the tools to do something else that they know is going to help them going in, no matter what their treatment is going forward, I think it is empowering for them.
So can you talk to us a little bit about prehabilitation and what that might involve for people who are unfamiliar with that concept?
So I think we have looked at it for quite a long time from, I suppose, the classical one where a lot of people would be quite familiar with would be kind of more your coronary rehabilitation. So that would be like rehabilitation after an event, so kind of post-habilitation. So we call it rehabilitation, whereas this is so it's really before an event. And it means to just try and get you into, I suppose, the best physical shape, especially if you're going to have anesthetic. And if you have other underlying health problems, that you're getting them controlled. It means that you quite likely would be able to tolerate the chemo better. And then the hope is that it doesn't just stop pre whatever intervention you're getting, that you continue it on. And especially for like things like chemotherapy, the exercise, the studies showing ongoing exercise in particular throughout chemotherapy and then thereafter. And like certainly when you're finished your treatment, everybody's going to want to know, well, how do I stop this coming back? You know, and one of the best ways of stopping something coming back again, and it was what Shireen would have talked about a couple of weeks ago, and what Rob Thomas would have talked about as well, is that it's the same things that should stop you getting cancer in the first place are also the things that are going to hopefully stop you getting a recurrence. So the prehab is probably just a step in the system, but it's not something that's been it's not something that has been up and running in my local health unit, or something that I think is available in Ireland. It seems quite new, and you can really see all the benefits of exercise throughout treatment. So it stands to reason you don't just wait until somebody's already depleted and ill from chemotherapy to then say, well, no, you need to exercise and you need to do this. The aim is you try and do it at the very start, and so that they carry that through then.
And your kind of your normal activities, kind of cycling and swimming in the sea, and a few years ago you were rowing competitively as well, but throughout your treatment you mentioned that actually sometimes with chemo you might feel a bit fatigued afterwards, and it may not necessarily, your body may not necessarily be up to doing your normal vigorous type activity. What did you do on those days?
So I suppose I changed my approach, again, having come from, and I was talking about this with a friend recently, coming from especially rowing training, which is a very, very high volume training. So it's a lot of endurance training. So a huge amount of cardio, and there's also strength associated. But I think that was always what I considered, that's me working out. You know, I had to get to a certain kind of heart rate and keep going at that level for a long time. And I really enjoyed that. And throughout, certainly for the first few chemos, you'd find often you get the chemo, and the first session was horrible. I was just really, really ill after it. And so it took a few days to kind of recover. And then within a couple of days, I was like, oh, I think I feel fine again. And I'd go out for a run, and I was like properly fast, and went out cycling with my friends, and I'd be going up hills, no bother. But I suppose with each chemo session, that's a bit more, it accumulates the fatigue. Like chemo works to kind of destroy a lot of the actively replicating cells. And so things that you might have had a normal hemoglobin going in, suddenly you're quite anemic. You know, your tissue repair is going to be slowed. So all those processes are going to be slowed down towards the end. So I found that wasn't, I still swam religiously, and I found it actually really helped. The second regime of chemo I was on caused a lot of joint pains, and the salt water just felt wonderful for that. And I cycled throughout, and I really liked that, because if I had my bike helmet on and my sunglasses, I didn't look like a chemo cancer patient. You know, you're in your cycling gear like everybody else, and I had a real sort of, just felt like I belonged. But I did certainly find that I used to get up every morning. I was a lot stiffer than I usually would be. So I found I did a lot more yoga, some Pilates, a lot more gentle movement. I might have gone for a walk as opposed to a run. But then I finished chemo, completely finished the course, and went a week later with a friend of mine, and we did a 7-day hike around the Beara Peninsula in the southwest of Ireland. So I think, you know, it was still varied, the training. And it was very much about listening to your body. And I think that's something I think you need encouragement, not to be afraid of your body, but also to listen and know when to pull back, and when to do what to do and when to do it. And I probably didn't do much, like, bar the yoga and Pilates, which there is an element of body weight training or resistance training, but I would have done far, because again, there were no gyms. It wasn't going to be going, I have a kettlebell, but that's about it. So I wasn't going to be doing any resistance weightlifting and that. And I don't think that would have been particularly helpful during chemo, but certainly there's really strong evidence post chemo to prevent recurrence. Its resistance training seems to be really where it's very, very helpful. So that's, if you're going to focus on your exercise after at least 2 sessions of resistance training a week, seems to really, really help reduce your recurrence of breast cancer.
So listening to your body is key, and also being flexible as well, and changing up the routine if that's what your body requires.
Yeah.
And actually, you did quite a lot of research looking at exercise during chemotherapy. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found as a interested party who wanted to know more about what you could be doing to help yourself?
Yeah, like I found, because again, when I met my oncologist, and I would have worked with him before, so he knew me quite well, and he sort of, I said, like, I presume I'm still okay to, like, you know, he went through the chemo and the side effects and what to look out for and be careful of the neutropenia and that. And then, you know, he said, have you any questions? And I said, well, look, you know, can I continue to train? Can I continue to exercise? And he's like, absolutely. And I said, is there any kind of level? And it was just the generic, you know, 150 minutes per week. And my partner was with me, and he laughed, because he's like, Susan will do that in a day, you know? So it was kind of, it sort of highlighted, I suppose, the sort of generic advice that's out there, as opposed to the kind of the personalized treatments. And so that's what kind of got me looking into it a little bit, and saw, you know, and still there's very little consensus as to, oh, you must do this amount and you must do that amount. But it's from a cognitive point of view, because I was quite worried. I really wanted to get treatment done, but I wanted to go back to work. I wanted to continue being a GP. And you hear a lot about the chemo brain. You hear a lot about the cognitive decline that treatment can have and illness can have. And there was one really good study in, I think it was La Jolla in California, that really showed, now they were older subjects, but they randomized them. They were all sedentary subjects beforehand, and some of them were randomized to an exercise program and the others weren't. And those that were randomized to the exercise program cognitively did way better. And that was supported. There was another study in Denmark that had something very similar. So, you know, from that point of view that like it's which is very interesting, because you think of it as more the physiological effects, so that it has such impact on your brain, and that highlights what we know about exercise in the first place, that it is so important for our obviously for our mental health, but also for actually our cognitive function. So it stands to reason that that is something that's going to help support you. There's not an enormous amount out there that's very prescriptive. Looking at what's happening in other countries, certainly very interesting. Israel have a really good program where, and it kind of links into the, like I was saying, the kind of rehabilitation and getting things going. They have in one of the hospitals there, I think it's actually more of it's brought out kind of nationally there. But when you go in, so often when you go in and get chemotherapy, you go in you often go in the morning, and if you either have a port or you get access, so somebody will take your bloods, and there's a few things, because it depends on how your blood levels are, whether you can continue, you can have your chemo or not. And there's often a few hours waiting around for the bloods to come back, for your chemo to be prepared in the pharmacy, and a lot of the time people are sitting in waiting rooms just waiting. So what they did in Israel was they actually had an exercise class at that point. So they had a physio would go in and get everybody moving, and so across the board. And so you can tailor it, and you can get your 68-year-old gentleman with prostate cancer, you can get your 35-year-old with breast cancer and everything in between, and just get them moving. And even doing that before your chemo session was of benefit.
It's a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you there.
No. Like, I think it is a great idea, and I think it's very sad. Like, the pandemic has had such an impact on things like that, like my experience, and it was fine for me. I lived quite close to the hospital, so I used to go up, get my bloods, and then come down with my cannula and go for a walk and do some gentle yoga, hoping that I wouldn't upset the drip. And then once the chemo was ready, go back up and get it. So I had plenty of movement that day beforehand, and I think it certainly helped. But you know, for other people that might have had to travel, it's a long day, it's a lot of sitting around, and that's just physically really hard. Yeah. And prior to this, I don't think I realized that I really don't sit very much at all. And I noticed it in being in hospital, you know, being in having surgery and saying, I'm not ill. Like, yes, I know I have breast cancer, but I'm actually not ill. And sitting in this bed is actually making me really uncomfortable, because I need to move. Like, I'm stiff and sore because I've been sitting here for 8 hours. And that's something like that's the equivalent of, if you think about it, your long haul flights that we're always warning people about. But it's quite similar. You're very static, and I think we just need to rethink how we offer all that.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you live and breathe lifestyle medicine, and it's proof. You know, talking about recovery time and the brain fog and things like that. You were back to work despite all your intensive treatment within about a year.
Yeah, less than a year.
Less than a year. You were back into
2 weeks, less than a year. But yeah.
And I remember when we first spoke, you were, I think, you were still working from remotely at that time, but you're back in to the clinic now, aren't you?
Yeah. So I was in the clinic, but I was at the start, my immune cells were still just quite low from chemo, and we just weren't really sure. And we sort of tested out for a few weeks. And again, in the pandemic, you're so used to doing telephone consultations anyway. I just did those, and then felt, and there was a bit of query as to whether the COVID vaccine had worked, whether I had immunity, you know, and these are all kind of unanswerable questions. So I just kind of worked with what my level of comfort was. And I've been back seeing patients physically for so I came back in March, and I've been back sort of physically seeing patients since May, so which has been great. And it's very funny, so many, especially because, you know, you come in, you have a mask on, and then the short curly hair. There's loads that patients that I've looked after for years, and mid-consultation, they're suddenly like, oh my God, it's you. And they're, you know, because they just haven't really, I suppose we had different people covering for me when I was away, so they're used to having different doctors, and I haven't introduced myself because sure, I've talked to them hundreds of times already. So that's been quite funny because that's happened a lot. But it's really lovely to be back actually physically seeing patients, and yeah.
It's an incredible story, and we were talking about resilience before you were diagnosed, and it's such an important topic that I would like to touch on a little bit more, to see how you were able to create that game plan when you got the diagnosis. You mentioned that you were doing athletics and sports since you were very young, and that's something that I was doing as well, and I found that having built that discipline through any sport, athletics, or just having the disciplined hikes with your parents kind of gave you a tool to deal with difficult times in life. I think cancer is just like any other difficult time in life, except it might be a little bit more personal, but it still is a difficult time that we have to get through, and we need to have the tool to get through it. And I think as you're telling your story, it does sound like you kind of are able to go back to what you have learned when you were young through athletics, through sports, and then apply this into your diagnosis to get through it. So what was the game plan when you heard it? I'm sure your mind was going and you were like, okay, I'm going to take this on. What were those first thoughts that you had to take on this diagnosis with a positive mind?
I think I just took it day by day, was a lot of it. I really made sure I didn't jump too far ahead. And like I do think you're right. I think probably on previous activity, sporting training really helps, because you knew you'd been through different things before. And certainly rowing, like, I think I rowed with people a lot younger than me, because I rowed at the university. So I was lecturing in the college, so I was university staff. But like most of the kids, they were students and kind of 20 years younger than me. And it really showed, I remember, because like if anybody who's rowed, there's something called a 2K, that's the indoor rowing. It's a test on an ergometer, so a rowing machine indoor. And it's, if done correctly and done to your maximum capacity, it is probably one of the most painful things you'll ever endure, because you're at a kind of an anaerobic threshold. It's going on for maybe about 7 minutes, but you're technically kind of sprinting for all that time. And it's all psychological. And I could really see that, because for a long time in the club, even though I was way older than everybody else, I had like the best 2K, because I suppose it gave me confidence. I knew what was going on there. And I think I looked at this, I remember saying, okay, this is more of a marathon. It's not a sprint. Don't look, it's not just, but it's this one 2K, or this is the first 500. And that's the way I actually approached chemo, is I kind of broke it down the way you would a 2K or a race, into chunks, into manageable chunks. And I think part of it, the challenge of it maybe, which sounds very odd, but I think in some ways, I think nearly when I completely finished my treatment, I was a little bit lost, because there was always this, okay, get through this round of chemo, get to the next one, and still try and have a life, and still try not to have cancer completely define your world, still try and nurture relationships and continue with your interests, and don't just have this whole void in your life, a year out of your life that's just complete void, because you're like, I don't remember anything that happened. I just went through chemo for a year, or through cancer treatment for a year. And I think that was probably part of it. I think I did break it down into, like I would have maybe some, and I remember talking with one of my friends and describing it using the analogy of it being like a marathon. And you know, there's parts that it's going to get tough, but that's probably closer to where the finish line is. And you just break it down. Don't worry about how you're going to get to the finish line. You just go with the process.
Step by step, every day. Also would love to pick up and highlight the importance of what you gained from the sport, is that you had the community. You had people around you who have trained with you and on whom you could, rest your head on their shoulders during these difficult times, as we do in athletics. It's super important to encourage everyone, even before a cancer diagnosis, even if they never have it, to kind of engage in community sports and get children involved in them, because even if it's not cancer, life is tough, isn't it? We need to have some tools and a community to fall back on, and get through on the other side with that energy of others and the good spirit. Did the community really help you get through this?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, it was obviously an altered community because of a pandemic. So a lot of people, you know, a lot of my conversations, a lot of people I never saw, I spoke with them on the phone. And there were a lot of my friends that I got to meet and just walk and talk, you know, and there's something very powerful. They always say that, you know, in a parenting, if you're worried, if your kid, you kind of feel that they're either not necessarily hiding something, but they're not being very forthcoming, it's very good, just go for a walk or stand beside them, like doing the dishes. And I think you'll often discuss more of your inner thinkings when you're side by side with somebody than sitting across from them. You know, I think when you sit down for a cup of coffee and you're sitting, or a cup of tea, and you're sitting down in front of somebody and engaging, I think you project it, you mirror a little bit, and you probably project what you think they want to hear. Whereas sometimes when you're side by side, I found that was definitely the things, you know, where you're worried and you're trying to, because your mind, obviously, even though I was very much like, take it step by step, but of course you're going to go on 5 years, 10 years, you've suddenly been, your mortality is suddenly being questioned, you know, and you can bottle all that up. But I found that was very helpful to kind of talk with some of my friends about that on our regular walks. And I think you're right. I think whether it be a sporting community, I think we all really, in the pandemic, has really shown that community is so important. And I've seen a lot of my patients that have cocooned, you know, and I haven't seen them in the past year. I've now seen them back, and they would have been these have been a lot of my over 70s that would have been involved. They might have played bridge, and they might have been involved in these different social clubs, and that interaction kept them young. And now they're the ones that, like, they've locked themselves away nearly for a year, and you can see the impact it's had. And it just shows how important community is. And I don't think it has to be a sporting one. I was very lucky. I really enjoyed sport. And I think if we focus on that too much, you alienate other people. Because, you know, I don't know if you know Vanessa Kimball. She's a lady who runs the Sourdough Club. So she has, again, very much about a community about baking and about diversity in food. And you see that, like, with, I suppose, the plant-based, a lot of the plant-based health, like plant-based health professionals and a lot of that. There's a community, it's an online community in many ways, but you get quite a lot of support there. And I think it is very, very, like, no man is an island. And I think that's very true. We're sociable creatures. And it's important to recognize that.
Absolutely, we are social animals after all. And looking at your art in the back, art communities where they bring people together to do clay work and express themselves through art is so powerful. Anywhere where we can get our patients to get engaged in this isolated world is super important. And actually, not long ago, I read one of the studies that supports people walking next to each other. Something happens in our brain where, from the past, where we were able to, you know, we walked so much as humans, from nomadic lifestyle, isn't it, from one point to another. And as soon as you walk together, that part of our brain engages, where we are a unit. We are going forward towards something to conquer together, and that brings such common understanding, even if we have different views. So there's even research to support that, which is super cool. Yes, community, exercise, getting out there, no matter how difficult life is going to be supportive, and even in cancer diagnosis, it seems. So to recap for our patients who have been diagnosed with cancer, when they do get the diagnosis from your both professional and somebody who has gone through it, what could grant them? What are the thoughts that you would advise them to go back to?
Yeah, I think very much that step by step, you know, and just really break it down into small chunks. Try not to think into the future. I think for me, there was a lot of I suppose I've always been really interested in nutrition as well, and really interested in food. And certainly there's lots of times through your chemo you feel horrible, food doesn't taste well and that, but there was a lot of things that I found really, really helped. And I think it's play around with that and trust yourself to find that. Like it's very difficult to have a generic, you know, everybody should do the same, and obviously different cancers and depending on people's level of ability, but there's certainly not a downside, no more so than when we talk about diet. There's certainly not any downside to eating plants and as much of them as you can. Again, there's not a downside to moving and as much as you can. And it's not going to be of detriment through your chemo, and it's going to make you feel better. And even if it is a walk, but just consistently, and do it every day. And I think while you'll feel betrayed by your body, you still have a huge amount of a say of what's going on. It's not inevitable that it's just going to continue to decline. And there's things that you, even if you have been the lung cancer, the smoker that gave themselves lung cancer, potentially, you know, even there's still things you can do to help, depending on your prognosis, but to help for your ongoing treatment. So I think it is that you have more power at your fingertips than you realize. It's not all down to whatever chemo they pump through your veins, whatever medications they give you to try and help you get to the next chemo, whatever your oncologist said. And while that's all absolutely vital, don't neglect the power you have yourself that can also help.
Oh gosh, that's so beautifully said. But it made me think that all these points actually have one common denominator in being in community, exercising a little bit, even if just walking, a whole food plant-based diet, and that positive mindset all have commonality that it reduces the inflammation, doesn't it? That allows the chemo to work a little bit better and makes you fight better. Inflammation is super important, also not again in chemo, but in every day in our life. And I think these wise words that you mentioned are applicable to our difficult world that we are going through right now. You mentioned with isolation, and it's something really sad what we see in A&E right now. Patients who are isolating in their 70s and 80s. A lot of them, unfortunately, are so hard to say. Even they're committing suicide in huge numbers. So it just shows how important that social connection is. And when they do survive it, their only comment is that I don't want to live without that social connection. And that kind of goes across the whole platform of how we should be treating each other and our treatments.
And I think the pandemic probably highlighted that. I think, if anything, it maybe highlighted how important social connection is to us, because I think we all spend so much more time. I mean, the internet is a very valuable resource in so many ways, but there's so many people that can spend so much time and have connections that are all digital and don't actually have human connections. And I think I look at generations, and at the risk of sounding like an old one, but like looking at generations beneath me, that's where a lot of their social contact is, you know, and they'd never pick up the phone to talk to anybody. You know, it's all via text message, it's all via Insta stories and TikToks and different things. And you lose a huge amount of human connection through that. And I think the pandemic has really highlighted that we do not thrive in that circumstance. Like, yes, there's been, you know, we've never had more access to digital media. There's so many digital platforms out there. There's so much information. You can talk to loads of people online all the time. But it's not a substitute for actually having a base and a good nurturing kind of support system.
If anybody is out there alone and lonely, we have the afternoon tea community. We know it's online only at this point, but that's why we created it. It's completely free of charge. If anybody wants to join in just for a chat, or if you're having difficulties, do come onto the website on the member area. This was one of the reasons why we started it, because we started afternoon tea with within the pandemic. And what we saw in clinical practice has been devastating. And it's incredible to hear that through this difficult diagnosis, you had your core group to support you through, which we didn't see for many of our patients. That was really heartbreaking. What amazing few points that you have mentioned here that can be applicable to everyone already. And I really I'm grateful for your story. And also from looking at it from a physician's perspective, this is not very common, but also that you were very fit before. So knowing what Professor Thomas was saying, it can happen to any of us. So it's so important to get ready to fight whatever comes in our way with tools, with the community, with a support system that can get us through these difficult times. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
We really enjoyed it. And now before we are going to go off to Zoom, you have mentioned 3 amazing points already, but is there anywhere in your local area actually that you would suggest to our listeners who are listening from Ireland, where they can reach out for support and help at all if they have a cancer diagnosis?
There's a fantastic charity in Galway called Cancer Care West. So that's in my local one. And then there's the Irish Cancer Society, and there's excellent support there. Cancer Care West had been running a gold standard service. They had Tai Chi, yoga, access to physios, huge amounts of patient support. And obviously a lot of that was curtailed during the pandemic, but they've fantastic digital services, and their other services have been up and running. So that's a local one. The Irish Cancer Society is fantastic. And there's some very good support there, because I think the difficulty is you can go online sometimes and Google some of this and you can end up down some crazy rabbit holes. So stick to the reliable resources, and there's some really good information there.
Thank you. And I must mention PlantBasedHealthProfessionals.com as well. If you want nutrition that is that has evidence-based to it, and you would like to support your cancer treatment, that's the way to go. We're going to put it in the chat and in YouTube as well. So it's Plant-Based Health Professionals UK. You can find them also on Instagram as well. It's led by Dr. Shireen Kassam. So it's just a perfect resource to get evidence-based nutrition, because we know that there is just too much going on out there and can be very confusing.
And I use it a huge amount. I would tend to give a lot of the fact sheets to my patients. They're just so accessible, so colorful, so they're so evidence-based and really applicable. So yeah, it's something I suppose I wouldn't say specifically for somebody with a cancer diagnosis that that's directly where they go, but certainly if there's a query about your nutrition and that, it's fantastic. Yes. And there's really interesting stuff on, like I would have found, and a lot of, specifically to patients with women with breast cancer, it's often, especially at my age group, it's not often discussed, but the treatments often come with the cost, in that there's a lot of hormone suppression. There's a lot of kind of premature menopausal type symptoms. And there's some really good things you can do with diet to help overcome that. And certainly from a plant-based diet, and Shireen has spoken a lot about it previously a few weeks ago as well. But yeah, that's, not to be afraid of soy, no more than, that's very outdated, but there's still a lot of concern. And yeah, some excellent resources there.
I think for if they want to find out a little bit about exercise and the quantity, we find Moving Medicine website very useful as well. And maybe it's important to mention that if you are not diagnosed with cancer, the ideal dose of exercise is about 150 minutes a week, that you can divide into about 20 to 30 minutes, about 4 or 5 times a week. So it doesn't take that long to actually have health gain measures from it. As well as if you can, as you mentioned, weight training, a little bit resistance training is at least twice a week. If you can implement it, that you have your perfect equation, and it really doesn't take that long, I think, right?
Absolutely. And so many, the benefits. I mean, I don't know if you read that book, The Miracle Pill, but like if we could just distill the benefits of exercise into medicine, we'd be putting it in our water, so there's no downside to it.
people would be standing in line for this miracle pill.
Yeah.
But it really is. I think they're just overcomplicating it, having to go to the gym or getting some fancy machine. But the stairs are, if you try to go up the stairs just once, I already, even with training, I still get short of breath. So maybe going up your staircase just 5 times a day, I think you're already winning, getting that heart rate up.
And purposeful movement, I think, is a huge, instead of driving to the supermarket, maybe you can cycle or walk, maybe you go to meet a friend, or you go, like, the amount of times you see people going to exercise classes and driving to go to their exercise class. And, and then they're like, oh, I have to devote this time for that, and I'm exhausted because of my training, and I got stuck in traffic on the way home, and this and that. I think we do need to change the way we look at it, and just look at it as movement, as opposed to it being very sport specific. And especially for women, I mean, the studies have shown, like, there's been lots of surveys that have shown, if you ask women the reason why they exercise, they say it's for weight loss or to stay in shape. And men will often comment that it's because it's a social aspect. They enjoy it. They don't have that same, it's not as tightly connected to their body image that it seems to be for women. And if that's the only reason to exercise, you're not going to enjoy it. You're not going to, if you're only doing it from a bodily image, you're expecting such and such a result, and you'll get disheartened. Whereas if you look at the overall feelings, and like I always used to say to my patients, like, did you go for a walk? And they were like, yeah. And I said, you mightn't have wanted to go. When you came back, did you ever say, oh, I wish I hadn't gone for that walk? You'll never regret it, and the hardest part might be starting, but you'll never come back saying, I wish I didn't do that. Whereas if you're really focused on, I need to lose weight, I need to look a certain way, I need to do this, that's such an intangible goal that you're not being true to exercise, and to the benefits of it by just trying to achieve that.
I think also I'd like to add here that people worry about, am I okay to exercise? Is it safe for me to exercise? And certainly for some people with established barrier plants, maybe coronary heart disease, they may have to start slowly, but perhaps we should also be asking, is it safe for them not to exercise and not to move? Because that could be doing a lot more damage.
Yeah, I love that. I always try to bring it to our patients, what you just mentioned with regards to flipping the narrative around with both with diets as well as with exercise, is that we are not doing it to lose weight. We shouldn't be, because the expectation ruins the experience. We should be doing it because our mind, particularly our mind, needs it. It needs to go out to do that little bit. It needs to eat that healthy food. And then once you start feeding it, then the outcome in the end will be that you lose weight, but it should be done for the mental health. And we have to know that our brain needs it. Without it, it cannot function. Anxiety, depression is through the roof, because it's always about diet and exercise for weight loss. And that makes the person even more anxious to start. Or maybe I'll start tomorrow, right? I hear that a lot from my patients. But why not just today, do it today, pop up the stairs 3 times and see how good you feel already. And tomorrow maybe do 2 times 3 and then have a little break. Definitely we need to change the narrative and stop feeding our patients into the diets and gym industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
What an incredible session. Thank you so much for joining us today. Next Sunday, we are taking a little break. I don't even know what I'm going to do with my Sunday like this. But after that, the Sunday after, we'll be talking about children's gut health with Dr. Rebecca Weiderman, gastroenterologist. Do stay connected with us on social media and say hello, share this very empowering YouTube video with your loved ones to empower them, to make them feel positive, and to give them tools that they can implement right away while they're battling cancer and other chronic diseases. The YouTube channel link is just here in the chat, and you can connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, as well as on our website.
And Yeah, and do join our membership and let us know in the chat and on YouTube how we're doing and what you'd like to hear from us next. And thank you for listening and have a very lovely evening. Thank you so much, Susan.
Oh, thank you very much. This was great.
Thank you. Now we go off to our Zoom chat.